There should be nothing about us without us. We should be able to hear what is being discussed live. It creates a false sense of that we're actually getting there. Meanwhile, informal settlements are mushrooming, jobs are getting lost, and we have graduates who have no hope of finding employment. We have to import toothpicks. We even import pens. Can't we make pens? Can't we make candles? Simple things. Factories that will be employing people to make candles, people to make pens, people to make toothpicks, people to make teacups, teaspoons, pots. Do we have to import such things? The brightest minds that we have are not into politics. That's the unfortunate part of it, because when people make resolutions, we do not make inputs and we do not criticize. And until decisions of conferences begin to be implemented, that's when those decisions begin to bite and then common people begin to cry. Because those who have brighter ideas don't make contributions. Unity is strength. Once we come up in number, I know some people will argue that protest and doing serves nothing. But nonetheless, it's a start. It's to elevate the consciousness of the people. To say, united, we can make a difference. And from there, you can take things to another level. As Africans, we should begin to complain less and do more. The more we keep on saying the West was developed on our slave, or they enslaved us to be where they are, and then and so on and so forth. We are the first civilization and so on. That doesn't alter the equation. We need to prove it practically. To some point, we've been degraded and we've been made to feel that we are worthless. Sanbonani Makaya, welcome back to Life with Mbongeni Khumalo. It's been a very hectic week. A lot of things have been happening in our country. For starters, on our shows, we've been hosting the G20 Summit, just a walking distance from here. And although, of course, we're disappointed, some of us, because much of what was discussed couldn't be televised. We do not know what it is that was discussed much. And then on the very first day, surprise, a declaration was signed by the world leaders, and I've been trying to get into my system to see what it is, but my system has crashed. I don't know. But nonetheless, as we know, G20 Summit started around 1999. It came as a result of the world going through several economic crises. And because of that, the free market system always goes through a cycle of crisis. It goes from a boom to a crisis, So they were trying to cushion it from future crises. So they came with the G20. And the G20, again, it is an expansion of the G7 or the G8. Because as we remember, around the 70s, 73 or so, people like Richard Nixon tried to cushion the world from an oil crisis, and then they formed the G7. And from there on, year on, as the years pass on, it was expanded decades later into the G20. So the G20 from 2008, it has been held annually. It has been held annually to discuss the economic state of the world. And just to give a perspective, G20 accounts for 85% of the gross world product, or the GWP, 75% of international trade, and 56% of the global population, 60% of the world's land area. If you include the EU and the AU, G20 comprises 78.9% of the global population, 83.9% of the global CO emissions from fossil fuel. Now that gives you the magnitude of the problems that we are tackling or dealing with. Now, it has 19 member states. And of those 19 member states, there are some who are there by default because they are members. They are part of the African Union or part of the European Union, which makes it in some 21 members. And then in addition, we have a permanently invited country like Spain. So other countries are there by merit, say for instance Mexico and India, but for the European Union and the African Union, we are there by virtue of being represented in the continental bodies. So G20, most of the people thought rather it was going to be of significance to the general person in the street, but in my opinion, it is benefiting the elite 10% or the elite 5% in society. And as we've seen, there were last-minute touch-ups and brushes on our city streets, on our pavements. That's not how you attain greatness. Greatness is attained through a series of economic activities over the years, over the decades. You cannot just all of a sudden decide that you are going to renovate city pavements and all of a sudden expect you will be seeing an economic development from a lower state to an advanced state of economy just overnight. You work hard for it, and you develop a population, the Human Development Index, you develop education, you develop health. These are the benchmarks that world countries will be measuring us against. So far, I doubt if and many countries who are part of the G20 actually merit being called powerhouses in the regions where they come from. So I guess maybe that's the reason why much of the discussions were held in camera, so we couldn't get to hear what it is that they were discussing about or debating about. Because if they are discussing us, there should be nothing about us without us. We should be able to hear what is being discussed live. And then another thing, we should be able or we should be given an opportunity to make inputs. And we were never given inputs on the discussions that took place. And on the very first day, a declaration was signed, which goes to show that the whole thing was a foregone conclusion. But nonetheless, we'll see as the months and days go by of what benefit the G20 will bring to the general members of the public.
Do you think that the general members of the public are going to be benefited or disadvantaged? Because as we've seen throughout this podcast, we've found out that the people that are invited to the G20 usually have an aim to disadvantage the common man for their own personal advantage. So how do you see this one playing out? As you've said, there were preordained, predetermined, pre-practiced bills that were passed that only took one day to sign. So what are your thoughts on the fact that there is a possibility we could see the politicians are just here to disadvantage us?
In fact, at some stage, a few decades back, we were made to believe that our country was actually on a right developmental trajectory. Most of the time, this is intended to create a false sense of hope that things are going to be okay, things are going to be okay. Meanwhile, nothing much is being done on the ground. And yet, some of the countries that were there, the developed countries, the really developed countries, they cushion their own population from the crises that have been happening before. Take, for instance, a country like Sweden. We are told that Western countries are on a trajectory of a free market system, yet Sweden is actually a welfare state. Poor people there are not actually poor. The state subsidizes them on a whole range of issues. So, and yet we are told that there's no leftist alternative in society. The left has failed the world. Of course, no economic system exists in its purest form. The free market system is not as free as it is supposed to be, and it is not in its purest form. It has borrowed elements from leftist concept. That's why we do not have a rebellion on a daily basis, because it cushions itself by providing for the common man or common woman in the street. So for us, I don't know. I don't think that it creates a false sense of that we're actually getting there. We're actually getting there. Meanwhile, informal settlements are mushrooming, jobs are getting lost, and we have graduates who have no hope of finding employment. We're in a very serious crisis that it will take a great will to be able to overcome. These are the challenges that we face. And so unless we create a society that is people-centered, nothing much will be achieved. And of course, this shouldn't take the burden off the shoulders of every person to try and make something out of their lives, to better themselves educationally, economically, and otherwise. Because ultimately, we are the masters of our own fate. If we put our faith in the politicians, then we are going to have to wait until forever. So, meanwhile, we try to change the system. We should try to also upscale ourselves. And then, yeah, that's how I see it. Most countries where you have people, we have an economy that has actually made a pickup from the ground. It's because people have decided that they are going to do things for themselves. And now our communities are going to start build your own community from scratch, build your own economic projects, and what do they call this? Communes, and then try to. These are the things that you can do by yourselves. Food sustainability, food security. These are things that do not need politicians for you to achieve. You can do them by yourself.
I agree completely with you there, Mbongeni. However, your average man, especially your average black man, simply wants to go to work, get paid a high salary, and then pay bills to enjoy his life, because life is full of bills. My question is this: how does a common man begin to mobilize an entire community just in his streets to say, guys, sacrifice a portion of your salary, because where will they get the income if not the salary, right? Sacrifice a portion of the salary so that we can invest in capital and then, grow a business, grow a community. Even spaza shops were began by black people, if you didn't know, for those that didn't know. But today, when black people refer to a spaza shop, they say emakuleni, which directly translates to the Indian shop. How interesting is that? Even Indians came to South Africa to benefit. Everyone that comes to South Africa benefits. The only people that aren't benefiting are the natives.
In fact, once we lose that sense of solidarity, of doing things as a collective, we are sure going to fail. To borrow a concept from Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey said, for instance, if each and every one of us were to pop up $1 or 50 cents, $1, and then decide that out of this money we are going to build schools, and then pop up dollars, each of us, then out of that money we are going to build clinics. He did, to some extent, Marcus Garvey did manage to have the Black Star, Ship Liner, and a number of businesses, a number of shops, a number of restaurants, and a number of, that's where you start building your own community, building your own economic system that is independent of those who exploit us. But so long as we expect that the system will provide you with jobs, and then they tell you that they don't have jobs for you, what are you going to do? Then you'll be stuck forever.
I want to know, if you were the first to begin, maybe let's say you said to the South Africans, let's build something. How much do you think your average, let's say maybe for instance, everyone that watches the channel contributed towards building a certain project? Firstly, what is the project that we would build, and let people vote on that too. And then number two, how much do you think each person would need to contribute, and for how long before this project is started up? And how many people do you think would be employed or helped by that project even? Especially knowing that most shareholders or people that invest are simply looking for a profit. They're not looking for the change of the economy, the change of a life.
Now, if you put away, let's put away the big terms like economic systems and so on and so forth, we can look at the things that we survive on a daily basis. What is it that we need? And I was at a funeral the other day, and then I heard a young person saying, as South Africans, we can hardly even manufacture a toothpick. We have to import toothpicks. We even import pens. Can't we make pens? Can't we make candles? Simple things. Factories that will be employing people to make candles, people to make pens, people to make toothpicks, people to make teacups, teaspoons, pots. Do we have to import such things? These are the things that we use on a daily basis. A light bulb. Do we have to import these things? These are the things that we can manufacture ourselves. We can there are people who are entrepreneurs in our communities. We can pump in money into those economic projects, and somewhere along the way, yes, we'll find our way. I do believe.
Are there any entrepreneurial initiatives that you've seen recently that would benefit the Black community or the South African community, to be honest, because everybody is suffering now?
Mainly, the main business that I see around it's food, restaurants and pubs and so on. And then if you do your research work, you research well, and then you provide what the other person doesn't provide. Come up with something that the next person would want to be interested in your business and not the other business. And in the process, once you do that, and then you have a lot of establishments coming up, it will lower down the prices of food because there will be competition between different establishments. And then it will be very nice. And then just trust ordinary people that they know what they want and they know how to get there. Just give them a jump start. Give them a jump start, and then they will do the rest for themselves.
I don't know, Mbongeni. I mean, I believe people are naturally good, but that's just an idealistic way that you're looking, or perspective that you're looking from. What I've seen in reality is people are either influenced or just enjoy negative stuff. So even if they had the opportunity to begin micro factories. Yesterday I was at a place where somebody was telling me in his community he's mobilized every resident to start building micro factories. So each house, if you can live at that place, you have to produce something. One house produces juice, the other macheo, the other avocado oil. And I just don't see that type of mandate working in Johannesburg, because mostly the Black person just wants to drink. That's what I see when I get outside the street and I look at the 2000s who are supposed to be our future.
And now, surprisingly, if you look at Joburg as it is, we have power cuts almost every second day. And then there are people who are saying, as independent power producers, who are willing to provide the national grid with extra electricity that we've generated as individuals from our homes. That's where entrepreneurship begins. And trust ordinary people that they know what it is that they want, and then they know how to get there. All that they need is just a helping hand. Just give them that gentle push, and then they will certainly do things by their own. And I do trust ordinary people that they know their story.
We emit less electricity. Northern countries emit more electricity.
We emit less CO2, carbon emissions, they emit more.
Meaning there's more productivity that side. Yet they never go into load shedding. We do. What's happening there?
Well, it's actually putting countries of the South at a disadvantage. We emit less CO2 emissions, and yet we are told that we should cut on fossil fuel. Yes, it's a grand idea because, of course, given the context of climate change, floods, and so on and so forth, and droughts, and yet countries that are the most advanced are the ones that are taking coal from countries of the South and sustaining their own industries.
I thought apartheid was over. How is that still allowed?
It is. Otherwise, they would have to lay off millions of workers unless they do that. And at least in the world, in a sector where I think they are making much progress is the sector of the EVs, the electronic vehicles. For instance, in China, they color code their vehicles. There are, I think, cars that are on EVs. I have green number plates. Those that still use petrol, I have blue number plates. It's easy when you're just simply standing at the street corner. You can pinpoint cars that are still using fossil fuel and cars that have now transitioned into clean energy. But other than that, most developed countries are the major emitters, and yet we are told that we are the ones who have to cut on fossil fuels. And yet again, we are the ones who stand to suffer most from floods and from droughts and so on and so forth. And yet it is our economies that are supposed to take a step back and for the sake of trying to push towards net zero. Most countries that benefit from fossil fuels are not about to stop now using fossil fuels. They are still going to go on for the next decade or decades or so.
Why does African leaders allow it? We see it, we see the manipulation, yet we agree with it at our expense. Why is that?
In fact, ideally, countries should be equal at international level, but in actual fact, that is not so. Some countries are powerful, some are less so.
Based on?
We have superpowers for starters.
Is this based on the World War victory?
It's based, if you want to put it crudely, it's based on military terms. Some countries are superpowers by virtue of being military powers, and secondly, some countries are economic powers. So those that are weaker depend on them for financial assistance and so on and so forth. Hence, nuclear waste from developed countries is dumped on countries of the South, and it takes decades to biodegrade. And also the question of discards of fast fashion gets dumped in countries of the South, and these are items that are produced by countries of the North, and our corrupt politicians get something out of that. They benefit, and so long as they benefit, they'll continue to allow it, and that's how the system works.
You don't think there's any way that...
Unfair as it is.
Is there no way we can find a new politician?
For us to be able to change how the world operates, we need to empower people on the ground. People on the ground should make decisions independent of those who are elected into office. In other countries, for instance, you have a direct system of representation. You know who represents you in parliament. If that person does not perform well, you recall that person. So in an area like Soweto, who's representing us in parliament? Who are our parliamentarians? And how can we hold them to account? How can we say we are not happy with 1, 2, 3, and if you do not deliver within 3 months, we are going to recall you and replace you with someone who would perform? It is the party that is more powerful than people on the ground. And so long as our system operates along those lines, then it means ordinary people will not have a say. They will vote every 5 years, and then every 5 years they'll be given promises and showered with promises and handouts, and then they'll have to wait for another 5 years to try and make a change.
So is the best way for the next man to also benefit, would it be to also be a politician?
I wouldn't say so, but nonetheless, the brightest minds that we have are not into politics. That's the unfortunate part of it, because when people make resolutions, we do not make inputs and we do not criticize. And until decisions of conferences begin to be implemented, that's when those decisions begin to bite, and then common people begin to cry. Because those who have brighter ideas don't make contributions, don't make inputs, and then it is society that suffers at the end of the day.
You don't think we would see they were conditioned not to care about politics? They were conditioned to always be on TikTok instead of thinking about politics.
We've become cynical.
Maybe they're also hopeless.
We've been fed hope for a very long time. For 3 decades, people have been fed hope. People have been told that jobs will be coming soon, investors will be investing in the economy, and then at some point we're told that we have jobless growth. The economy is growing, but it's not creating jobs, and then people should be patient, things will be fine. And now people are fed up. Sometimes millions of people do not vote nowadays. At some point you find that less than half of people who are eligible to vote decide not to vote. So those who are voted into office actually voted by default. They are voted there because those who have the power to vote them in or out decide not to vote, decide to just pull out of the system altogether. So it's a very sad state of affairs, sad as it is, but nonetheless, before we say a system or a certain way of doing things has failed, we should push it to the limit, push the voting system to the limit, and until it fails, then we decide on other alternatives. But so far, because people decided that they are going to, many of us, of course, were very skeptical around 1994 if the elections would bring any changes. But nonetheless, the majority in society decided that that was the route that we're supposed to go. We've gone through that route. And
what were the alternatives? Were there any alternatives from voting in 94?
No. It is said you cannot win on the table what you've lost on the battlefield. So the National Party went into the table as the victor. They had the army, they had parliament, they had the civil service, they had the police, they had the judiciary, and they were integrating us into their system. So those were the belligerents, the rebels, had to be integrated into the army, integrated into the police, integrated into the prison services. They were becoming an adjunct of the system. So they were there to accept that this is how the system operates and they are not going to change anything. And their leaders were given packages to manage their followers, and that was that. And even them, they had no clue as to what it is that needed to be done to pacify their followers. And that's the sad part of it. And then people were fed hope for a very long time, and now they are beginning to be disillusioned. And then the alternatives that they are turning to actually bearing very little fruit, because as you see now, we are stuck with the government of national unity with its own infightings. And in the next coming local government elections, we'll be having a proliferation of political parties, and very few of them will deliver to the common people on the ground. The common man or common woman on the ground stands very little to benefit.
And then where do you see South Africans going next? Once the state has failed?
No, normally, particularly in our own society, it's young people who come up with better alternatives. We know in the 1950s, it's young people who came up with alternatives. They shook the system until we had 21 March. And then again in 76, it was young people who pioneered that movement. And in the 80s, so what is the youth of today doing?
Drugs.
That's the problem. They are smoking hookah pipes and it's very sad. They have no direction. So they are the ones who will have to come up with, as it said, every generation has its own mission. It's up to it to either find it and fulfill it or to betray it. So young people will have to find their own mission now, what it is that they need to do to improve their own living conditions.
Mr. Mbongeni, I'm a little disappointed that you've got so much faith in the young people of South Africa today, because to me, there aren't any more young people. I know children that are 20 years old already have babies. I know people that are parents. They're not young. They're already taking care of the next generation. That to me shows giving up or despair, That to me shows that in 2042, are these going to be our adults? Are these going to be the people that their own young kids look up to? I mean, and then what's the future for the child that is born or that's growing up in 2042, who's looking up to a 2000 father? Where is South Africa in 2060? And I'll still be alive in 2060. That's the sad part.
In fact, if you live your entire life in a particular community, living in a cocoon, you don't see any possibilities. But once we come up with community initiatives, take a few individuals, let them travel the world and see what it is that young people their age are doing to improve things for themselves. What are young people doing in Japan as we speak? What are young people doing in China, in Europe, in Latin America, in Canada, and the US? And you must benchmark yourself with the best, and then you come up. If you put yourself in the league of mediocre people, you'll always remain in the mediocre league. But once you aspire to be in the level of those who make things happen, then you'll have something to hold on to. So we need to benchmark ourselves with the best, because South Africa was once in the league of the best. That's where when people say we need to turn things around and revive our own fortunes, that's what people are actually saying. We need to put South Africa there and notch higher where it actually used to be.
I was doing an analysis of who makes the most profit, right? Fourways Mall is closing down, yet more and more malls are mushrooming in Johannesburg South. We all know or can assume that the north of Johannesburg is where the money is meant to be. Yet, all the people in Johannesburg North are investing their resources in building businesses in Johannesburg South, in Guamashu, in Khayelitsha, all because they believe or know or see the money at the bottom of the pyramid is that's where the money is. So would you say, from your experience, that the lower socioeconomic hubs are where more cash is spent? It's just less recorded.
Again, I'm not surprised that some malls are closing, because if people do not have money to spend, how will the retail sector survive on? And again, you have a situation where a mall is built about in a 5-kilometer radius within the range of another shopping mall. How is it going to survive? How is it going to compete? And where will people get money to buy in so many stores that provide the same product? How are they going to survive? Of course, some malls will close down. And shops that survive in the retail sector are those that provide basic things like food and
needs.
Basic needs. It's those shops that survive. But unfortunately, many stores are closing now. And we no longer have, in the past, you used to have chain stores. In the furniture shop sector, you used to have Bradlows, Ellerins, and so on, a whole range of shops to choose from. But if you go to the Joburg CBD now, it's people who are doing things from hand to mouth. It's small shops all over the place. You hardly see Edgar's there, you hardly see Jet, you hardly see, companies that we grew up patronizing, buying from. It shows that the economy is in decline. Some people may say SNP, say no, they are upgrading us from junk status, but nonetheless we are still, as I see it, we are in junk status. It's just a play around with terminology and semantics.
Why? Why is it that the shops that used to be there aren't there anymore? Why has Johannesburg degraded? Is there anybody to blame? Is there any reason?
As I said before, at some point we have adopted pieces of legislation that are applicable to an advanced economy or a developed economy, and try to make a patchwork to an so-called developing society or developing economy. And now, in countries where you have full employment or where employment hovers around 3%, they can afford to impose labor decisions on the employers. They can afford to impose decisions on the government of the day to demand that you want the government to put the rights of the workers center stage. But once you have above 30% unemployment, then it means what that does, it cheapens labor. It means you have a whole pool of unemployed people to choose from. So if you do not want to do a certain kind of work, there are many people who are unemployed who are willing to do it.
Okay, I'll be honest with you, man. I was thinking, or I assumed that you would say it's the foreigners, right? But I love the fact that your stance is very different from Ike's, and that you don't put one particular group responsible for the decline of South Africa.
That also comes into effect. It does come into play, not just people from beyond our borders, people from the countryside. In the past, we knew that people from the countryside would take jobs that people in the city normally wouldn't take because their standard of living requires that they should have a higher mark, a higher salary mark. But now people from beyond our borders also do take jobs that are low paying jobs that citizens are not willing to work for. And then if you go to McDonald's, you go to a number of such establishment, you find that mostly it's foreign nationals who work there and not people from within our borders, because they are willing to settle for less.
Of course, but then my question
in the farming sector, people who work there mostly are people who come from beyond our borders. They are willing to settle for less. Of course, I do understand if you have, even I myself, if you were to put me in another country, put me in Europe, put me in elsewhere, put me in Tokyo, I would be willing to settle for less because I know I have no one to depend on. I have no connection of relatives and friends and so on to rely on. I'd have to settle for less and try to, your expenditure, try to bring down your expenditure in order to be able to be accommodated by a lower salary.
And survive. However, my question is this, right? I can see it's happening, but I just don't know the end result, right? Let's go 60 years from now, when Yes, sir.
The unfortunate part is that for us, in the countries of the South, we always experiment with following one master, and then if this master fails, we substitute the master with the other. For instance, we were colonized by Western countries, and now we are disappointed with Western countries. We think the solution is to substitute them with Eastern countries. And then again, if we get disappointed by Eastern countries, it will be very difficult to go back to Western countries, because remember, we would have taken their businesses and handed them over to our new masters and our new masters. That's why most countries that follow the Eastern route, in order to stay in office or in order to survive, they become brutal, because they know that should they be deposed from power, should they be removed, the countries of the West that they've disappointed will come back to haunt them and punish them.
Why would you even need a master? Why can you not just be your own master?
That's the problem, because countries are not equal. In an ideal world, countries should be cooperating on an equal basis. But countries, say China for instance, they want to steal from us. They wouldn't mind if people vandalize our own railway system in order to take the scrap metal and ship it to support the growing Chinese economy. They wouldn't mind. But for us, it's destruction of our own infrastructure. Because we are a weaker economy, there's nothing much we can do about it. So we need to empower people on the ground, and people on the ground are the ones who know. They are the ones who suffer most. They are the ones. Politicians, for instance, take the e-tolls. People who signed for it, they didn't care because they were exempt from paying e-tolls. It's people on the ground who suffered. And until then, people kept on protesting and protesting until finally, at last, the e-tolls were scrapped. I do have faith in ordinary people. Unity is strength. Once we come up in number, I know some people will argue that protest and doing solves nothing. But nonetheless, it's a start. It's to elevate the consciousness of the people, to say, united, we can make a difference. And from there, you can take things to another level. But it's always better to create public opinion. If you have numbers, that's why people speak of the arrogance of numbers. If you have numbers in parliament, you have seats, you can block certain pieces of legislation. More importantly, if you have most seats in parliament, you can simply pass legislation that this is the direction that the country is going. But we've never used our numbers anyway. Even our numbers have never benefited us.
Even when we do get the platforms who use our numbers, like with our own celebrities, what we promote is just basically more madness and more regression than anything else, right? And I just don't see, especially the young black South African, doing or becoming more wiser and deciding to change their ways of living. In fact, I believe that comfort zones are very comfortable, and the more you are comfortable in a bad place, the more you die. So the question I wanted to ask was, 60 years from now, once the country is now fully collapsed and Nigerians are the new South Africans, and Africa, you know, there's no longer South Africa, but there's only Africa. What then will Africans do? Because the idea right now is to run to South Africa for security. South Africans are trying to protect South Africa from degrading or declining, yet they're failing to do so. So once it's declined completely, what is the route? Are we going to run to the sea?
It's going to be a cycle of violence. What we see already in other parts of the world where people turn against each other, it's because they are competing for scarce resources. For instance, not just people from beyond our borders. For instance, take Joburg. Joburg, we no longer have the jobs that our traditional jobs that we normally had. And yet you have people from the countryside still flocking into the city, believing that they'll find employment. And also people have this herd mentality. They do not want to take their own fate in their own hands. They believe that someone out there will save them. In North Africa, you have Traore. People believe in Ibrahim Traore, that you lead them to salvation. Here, we've been forced to take sides in the Russia-Ukraine war. We have people who are stuck there right now, South African citizens who are caught up in the conflict. And yet, the sad part of the Ukraine-Russia war is that, in fact, some of us have been trying to intervene at a diplomatic level. The sad part about it is that, as Father Michael Lapsley put it, the Russians are our comrades. They helped us in dark times. So are Ukrainians. Ukrainians are our comrades too, because they were part of a broader socialist camp. They were part of their fellow travelers, if I may put it that way. So we were helped by countries, the Yugoslav republics. They are countries that supported us through the dark days. And yet now we are forced to take sides. We must choose between Ukraine and Russia, which is, I think, it's not on. So we are doing so for whatever reasons.
Is it truly impossible? Is it truly impossible for Africa to be independent of relationships? Just like Gaddafi was suggesting, just like Traore is doing with Burkina Faso, to say, look, we love the relationships we've had with you guys, the white guys, not necessarily the white guys, I mean the non-Africans.
Burkina Faso and those countries, like, they're actually moving. We are still caught up in the bipolar world. They're still moving. By rejecting the West, they are going east.
They're not.
They're in the exit.
They just received one loan from Russia, and he said this will be the final loan that he receives from anybody, and he's using this loan to generate business inside his own country with his own factories, and in his own economy, he'll pay it back and become an African powerhouse. What's stopping the other countries from doing that? Like Congo, like South Africa.
Burkina Faso, Niger, we are caught up in, it's the same politics of the Cold War. We still find ourselves in a situation where either we choose the US or we choose Russia or China. We are still forced to make those choices. These are superpower countries. They are fighting proxy wars through us because we are weaker countries. We need foreign aid. They supply us with military hardware. They supply us with medicine. They supply us with a lot of things.
My question is this. You said the superpowers were the states before, Britain, and then you had Russia and China on the other side. China wasn't always a superhouse. That's what many people fail to understand. When I was growing up, I looked down on China, We knew China to come up with the fake products. Little did we know that they were training to become manufacturers of the new world. Little did Nike know, little did Adidas know, little did iPhone and Apple know that by teaching these Chinese people and taking their factories to China for Chinese people to manufacture, they're actually teaching and training them on how to not only copy, but to improve on the product that they came about with, So I'm not surprised, Mina, when I see China coming up with their own cars now, with their own phones, with their own new tires, because you can only be a student for so long. It only makes sense for me. I predicted this 15 years ago. It only makes sense that the next powerhouse will be China. And I'm predicting this again.
That's the economy in the world.
Yes. That is yet to be proven, because the stats that they're also giving in the news can also not be true. We cannot test them. My question is, Africa might also be very large in numbers and in economy, right? I can see that China is becoming a powerhouse. Do you think industries will make the mistake again of teaching even Africans how to make their own skills? Or has the ship sailed and are Africans doomed to be slaves for good, while the West reclaims their citizens?
No, again, China has not always been independent. It was part of the Comintern or the Communist International. It was part of the Soviet bloc, although they did have their own differences with the Soviet Union. But nonetheless, they've always been on the socialist or the communist camp. And from there, they use state resources, because it's like if if you put all your resources towards a single purpose, and then you are bound to make progress to some extent, and then gradually they became a superpower. And again, they do not have those labor rights that we have in westernized countries. That's why big brands go to China to manufacture their products. Now, for instance, we knew that when you buy a pair of All-Star sneakers, it used to be written All-Star made in USA. Now it's just written Converse All-Star, because some fake ones are still written made in USA, but the original All-Star used to be made in the United States. Now you get All-Star made even in South Africa, even made in Germiston, made in the Far East, made in Bangkok, and so on and so forth. And because labor is cheap, it's cheaper there. And you also have child labor. That's why many models have been bringing that into the fore, that they will not go into the catwalk wearing clothes that were made by exploiting kids in the Far East. That's what has almost brought a revolution in thinking in the fashion industry. And again, as Africans, we should begin to complain less and do more. The more we keep on saying the West was developed on our slave, or they enslaved us to be where they are, and so on and so forth. We are the first civilization and so on. That doesn't alter the equation. We need to prove it practically on the ground by making groundbreaking inventions, groundbreaking decisions that alter the state or the economic fate of our own people. So take, for instance, in South Africa, we're given the most advanced economy in the continent in 1994. What did we do it? We ruined it 30 years down the line. That's what the brother of Thabo Mbeki is saying, Mieletsi Mbeki. He says, black capitalists create nothing. They want capital in order to ruin it. They do not develop it. Even in the 80s, you had black chain under apartheid. It was ruined by black capitalists. Black chain was supposed to be a supermarket for a collective, but the individuals who were shareholders would go there at night and steal their own stock to support their own plaza shops at home. They killed it. They killed black chain. We can come up with our own shopping malls that are supposed to support and put black people on another level. Black people, we think in a very minuscule way. We think in individual terms and not as a collective. That's why we'll always be outmaneuvered by other ethnic groups. We do not think big. That's why I say Marcus Garvey he despised a lot of black thinkers who always wanted to theorize and do. He simply said, just come up, buy black. Try to, whatever you need, go to a black-owned enterprise. Go to a black-owned outlet. If you want bread, go to a black-owned spaza shop. If you want clothes, buy from a black boutique. If you want furniture, go to, how many people do that? Very few.
I am one of the people that stopped doing that. I used to do that until I realized that these black-owned businesses are charging me more than the Indian businesses. They are making now their bread Louis Vuitton bread. What? I mean, Indian people, when they buy from Indian shops, is because even the prices are Indian. They've thought that the average human being won't be able to afford a loaf of bread for $20,000. Do you understand me? So if our own black-owned stores now, but they want to compete with Hermes and Louis Vuitton, how the hell do they expect the regular black man who's coming from colonization and with a poor job, poor background, poor education to now buy their 5,000 Rand bread?
And another thing, style is not necessary. If you buy something expensive, it does not necessarily mean you have style. Style is not always costly. For instance, sometimes for solidarity reasons, I do go to a shop and instead of buying Supega, I choose to buy Lokshin Culture. Instead of buying All Star, I have a pair of sneakers called Cuba. I bought it out of solidarity, for the solidarity to the people of Cuba. It's written made in China, for the it's written made in the People's Republic of China, I think for the Cuban Republic or something of that sort. I bought it with I made a conscious decision that in buying this pair of shoes, I'm actually supporting the economy of Cuba. So it's about time we have our own brands. What happened we had Stone Cherry. It was our own homemade brand. We have, I think, we have a number of designers that we do not even support here at home. I think the Rip as well. The Rip is our own local product.
Then we have a question of quality as well. I mean, am I going to buy a product that has less quality based on the fact that it's black owned?
That's the problem. Try to benchmark yourself with the best, or else people will continue to buy Louis Vuitton and so on and so forth, Gucci. And to us, I mean, Gucci is not something new, man. I know people who wore Gucci as early as 1986.
What?
You know, those white Gucci jackets with red and green stripes. And way back in 1986, people who wore Gucci.
Wow.
And people who wore Abita. Way back then. Well, it's people who are, you know, if you are new you've been poor your whole life, and then all of a sudden you have a lot of money. Suddenly you want to display your wealth. And again, well, I wouldn't blame people who do that, because to some point, we've been degraded and we've been made to feel that we are worthless. Style is something that also helps you to gain confidence. So that's why most of the time you find people who've been poor all of their lives and suddenly they have newfound wealth. They will be wearing big gold chains and so on, and a lot of rings, because they want to, you know,
compensate.
Yes.
Wow. Jeez, man, so
you rarely see an academic, a professor wearing a lot of jewelry and so on. It's
unnecessary.
It's unnecessary.
What now do we do? You know,
there's a lot of playing around.
Man, I've never seen a country that doesn't produce like South Africa with the resources that they have.
I know countries that have no resources at all. Take Switzerland. Switzerland has no resources, but it's ahead of us. And then again, you know, if you take, for instance, our countries, take a country like Nigeria. Nigeria is not it cannot compete side by side with South Africa, except that it has a greater population. That's why their economy is more or less on par with ours. Our population is at about 64 million. There you have, it's how many? Above 100 million people. And now, you take the least developed country in Europe, it is more advanced than Africa's most advanced economy. Go to Eastern Europe, look at their infrastructure. It's it's first world compared to us. We are third world in comparison. And yet they see themselves as least developed in relation to Western countries. And yet we always want to ape, I don't know, maybe that's what we are destined to do. We always want to imitate countries that have failed. We do not learn from the best. We always want to imitate failed states. Well, in fact, countries people, our own chief ideologues, where do they look to? For instance, if you go to China, go to a Chinese person and ask them about Chinese socialism, Maoism. Yes, Maoism did help us to a certain extent in terms of framing ideas in relation to the state of economy where we are. But if you ask if you meet a Chinese person and you ask him about Chairman Mao, they look at you like you're crazy. They are way ahead of Chairman Mao. They've far developed beyond these ideas. We are the ones who are still doctrinaire Marxists, doctrinaire Leninists. You go to Russia, people don't talk about Leninist ideas anymore. They've used those ideas to build themselves and consolidate their economy and go beyond the ideas of Lenin. Don't be stuck in the ideas of the founding fathers or founding leaders. Go beyond, think beyond. Lenin died somewhere there around 1917, but we're still stuck with his ideas. We have not contributed much. Lenin made his own contribution over and above the ideas of Karl Marx. And then Mao Zedong advanced the ideas of Lenin. That's why people speak of Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. And yet we are still stuck in those classic texts, and we are not contributing anything to them. That's why we are still complaining that we do not owe the West owes us instead. But the West is ahead of us.
And it keeps on
advancing.
And coming to take from us.
Yes, it's a good idea that we should have debt cancellation and renegotiate our terms of trade with the West, but much depends on us. We should do what we need. We should do ourselves. Those who feel it know it. Well, I think not unless we begin to, so long as we do not see ours. The other time someone said, I think some people were ridiculing Prince Mashele when he said black people are underdeveloped, and then as soon as they realize that they are underdeveloped, then nothing much can be done about it. But that's unfortunate. That's a bitter fact. We must begin by realizing that we have a problem. And not unless we accept that we have a problem, we are not going to find a solution. So other than that, that's it. Remember to subscribe, like, and share. Till we see you next time. Goodbye.